Welcome to Stop Overthinking, the podcast for overthinkers, people pleasers, and perfectionists who want to feel calm and confident enough to handle whatever life sends your way. I'm your host, Kristen Odegaard, a women's life and mindset coach, lifelong educator, and recovering perfectionist. Hello. Thanks for joining me again this week. Summer is in full swing, and I hope you're enjoying it. I know I have been outside, and it feels good to just get some more walks in, to be able to sit in the sun. And I love the longer days. We're coming up, by the time you hear this podcast, we will have had our longest daylight in our hemisphere. And then the days start getting shorter again, and that makes me sad. So anyway, I hope you are able to enjoy, relax, find some calm in this time of the year. So today I'm going to talk about mental flexibility. And I'm going to use an example here first. Within the last week and a half or so, I was flying home from a conference in Atlanta, and I was landed in Chicago at O'Hare Airport, and then was supposed to have a connection to the little regional airport near my home. So in Chicago, my flight was delayed 7 times. No joke, 7 times. And then it was finally rescheduled for the next morning. So most of the time, I would tell people that I love to travel, including air travel, so that I can get to additional places and takes less time, all those sorts of reasons. But for about 24 hours during this whole circus, I did not like traveling. I didn't like flying or airports or hotels. I just wanted to be at home in my own bed. But then again, as of today, days later, I would still tell you, yes, I really do love traveling and air travel and being in hotels and being away. So here are 2 thoughts that seem contradictory, that I just wanted to be home in my own bed, not traveling, versus, I love to travel and get away. So they seem contradictory, but they were both true for the moment in which they occurred. So this is essentially mental flexibility and what I'm going to talk about today. It's being able to hold 2 thoughts that seem to contradict each other, that are different, but can both be true. Mental flexibility is essentially the precursor to emotional flexibility or emotional resilience, or sometimes you hear it as emotional agility. It's getting to be more of a buzzword. And I would say even before having that emotional regulation, which means that you're less reactive to the world. You're less reactive to your own thoughts and your own brain. You are living on a more even keel experience. You still have the whole breadth and depth of emotions, but fewer big swings. And many of us are too changeable with our emotions. And we have to learn how to tone it down to have smaller variances so that we feel more stable. Like we have all these ups and downs with our emotions. And that's one of the main things that we do in coaching. But what's different from mental flexibility, so that was emotional flexibility. What's different with the mental flexibility is that we're not as changeable with our thoughts. And it's really important to be able to recognize how our thoughts contribute to our feelings. So when we are rigid and attached to our thinking and we don't have mental flexibility, it makes it even harder to have the emotional regulation that we're looking for. So our mental flexibility is the capacity and the skill of training our brain to be open to thoughts and ideas and perspectives that might be different than what you currently think. So you can think about it this way. You shift your body to be able to change directions. You might swerve your car into, a lane or on the shoulder to be able to avoid danger. You can also learn to shift your thinking process and become more adaptable to the situation at hand. And this is essentially what we call mental flexibility. Sometimes it's called cognitive flexibility. And like most things in life, this is easier said than done. Because what generally happens is we get a new thought introduced to us, and there's tension there because it's new and it's different. And we fall into what is often called cognitive dissonance. That's when there's this mental tension caused by the conflict of 2 different ideas that contradict each other. And most of the time, we deal with this by just dismissing the new idea and doubling down on the belief of the original thing. And this happens multiple times in a day. We like to be rigid and attached to our own beliefs because it keeps us comfortable. Our brain wants to stay efficient and on the same path, using the same neural pathways all the time. It's easier in terms of, the what we're thinking, and because we can just be on autopilot. But having to actually consider another thought, or one that conflicts or is contradictory, takes brain power. And most of us just don't want to deal with it. We see this especially in big hot button items, religion and politics and, women's reproductive decisions, climate change, or even thoughts on COVID and the pandemic. People are very clear most of the time on where they fall with their beliefs and ideas with those things. And there is so much information out there on everything that you can essentially find evidence for whatever you want. Okay, we are in the information age. We are bombarded with information, and our brain knows that. So it filters things. And when you land on what you decide to be true, it's really difficult for someone to change your mind. In fact, there are studies out there that show that the more information put towards you that contradicts with your current beliefs will actually make you find reasons to dismiss or reject the evidence. So if you're trying to persuade someone, it really backfires most of the time and can actually cause the other person to be entrenched even more in their thinking. Okay. And so this happens obviously with other people, and we do it to ourselves. So if this is happening to you, it's okay. It's normal. This is how our brains work. It doesn't make you wrong or stubborn or stupid or a failure. It just happens because our brains don't want to be wrong. And it's also true that our brains like having these shortcuts of sorts, staying on the same pattern, because we are filtering all this information constantly. We want to be able to recognize things and people and have these things. We don't have to decipher everything that we see every moment of every day. It would be like that old movie, 50 First Dates with Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore, where you need to be reintroduced to people and things on a daily basis. Kind of what a nightmare. It's not efficient or practical. And our fabulously adaptive brains know this. And so they want this repetitive consistency to keep you out of overwhelm. So if there are ideas that conflict with what you have, it just pushes them away. It doesn't really even come in, and it just happens unconsciously on autopilot, however you want to think about it. Our brains, this is kind of evolutionary biology too. Our brains want to be right. They want to protect us because as we evolved, if we were wrong about, food or safety or people, we would have died. So while parts of us have evolved to modern times, our brain is still wired for that safety and certainty and security. That's big. Doesn't want to think about being wrong or alternative thoughts. And for my, audience of high achievers, you know this, because if you allow thinking that maybe this isn't 100% accurate, maybe I'm not quite right, maybe I could have done this differently, you are afraid of spiraling into this pit of despair about what else could be wrong. What else is wrong with me? It's way too much of a threat. So your brain flares up and it just doesn't even let you go there. So while this is an unconscious process, we can teach our brains to be more conscious at certain times. Okay. Not where we want to introduce, these big threats all the time, but you can be more conscious, you can be more intentional when it fits for you. So we let it run unconsciously for, identifying objects that's a table and a door, and those are shoes. You know how to tie your shoes, you know how to drive the car, you know how to write. Let it run unconsciously for all of those things when we don't care about changing our thoughts or being open to new possibilities, but becoming aware that there are times and places that you want to consider new things. And sometimes that's hard, and our brain is going to put up that wall because it's different than what's already there. This mental flexibility is a process that you learn to apply when you want to develop these new skills. And it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable. You're going to have to feel this cognitive dissonance without shutting down or resisting the new information. This thought work that we do, changing our thinking, we know is tied to how we feel. So we have to become okay with the fact that there's going to be this tension and this discomfort and recognize you're still relatively safe in your body. You don't have to double down on your first thinking or your first thoughts, because that doubling down is the mental rigidity. And we want the opposite of that to be able to grow and evolve. So a lot of times we get stuck that like being rigid and really strong in our beliefs is like a badge of honor. And that's the way that we want to be. And there's going to be times that's perfectly fine. This is always a choice for you to be able to become aware and choose where you want to allow other options in. I will use an analogy of water. And if you think about the way that water moves in its liquid state, that would be like mental flexibility. Water in its frozen state would be like mental rigidity. So when water travels and it's liquid, it has the capacity to find all different paths, or, whether it's a little stream, a raging river, or the drops coming out of the faucet in your kitchen. And if you've ever noticed how, a trickle of water moves, you've seen this in action. The water flows in several different directions and it finds all sorts of ways to surpass obstacles but continue moving. Water is going to follow the path of least resistance. But ice, on the other hand, is rigid. And if it meets an obstacle, it can't move past it until it melts or it breaks apart. You can't easily force something that's rigid to be more fluid. This is the piece where mental rigidity can cause a problem for you, in the sense if you are so rigid on some of your thinking and your beliefs that it can it can break things. It might be relationships, it might be communication patterns, it might be work sorts of projects where things break down because you are so clinging to your thoughts that you don't have the willingness to see any other perspective. When you are mentally flexible, you'll have that ability to find more paths to a solution, to be open to new ideas, to be accepting of what is the reality, even when you don't like it. You might be able to see things from multiple perspectives and recognize that they all are true. But on the other hand, if you have this rigid mental thinking, you might struggle with creativity, problem solving, conflict resolution, and loving and accepting people, including yourself. So here's an example. Your friend suddenly stops talking to you, isn't returning texts, whatever, just kind of starts ghosting you. With this mental flexibility, you can consider why they might be acting this way. It allows you to consider their point of view, think about things from their perspective, other possibilities, might be their schedule, maybe someone is sick, what else is on their plate. With mental rigidity, it turns into, this person, isn't the kind of friend that I need. Or sometimes we internalize it as well, is to, what did I do wrong? Why aren't I a good friend? I'm not valuable enough to keep them in their lives. And so mental flexibility does not mean that you're changing every belief that you hold. It doesn't mean that you need to change any beliefs at all. What it does is allow you to just stop existing and living on autopilot, to be more conscious and more intentional with your thoughts, that we have 60,000 of them a day. Doesn't mean this is easy. If you've ever worked on being more physically flexible with your body, you know it doesn't happen passively. When I was growing up in cheerleading and gymnastics and dance, I had to stretch and for physical flexibility and hold it there, maybe for 30 seconds, maybe for a minute, maybe for a couple of minutes. I couldn't stretch my hips or my hamstrings to do the splits without getting out of my current comfort zone. I couldn't do what I had always been done and be more flexible. So like physical flexibility, you don't get this overnight. And it might be uncomfortable a little bit. And I'm not suggesting that you go and, try and do this all at once because that could be painful. But gradual, consistent practice is going to build your mental flexibility as much as it would if you were doing this on a physical realm. We know that mental flexibility is the ability to change your current thinking and not automatically reject some new thoughts. And depending on where you're starting from and how deeply held this thought is, will determine how much time and effort it's going to require to accept some other kinds of thinking. But the mental flexibility part is to help you get through the discomfort of believing both things on your way to new thoughts. So, how do we do this? Something that's flexible, I'm thinking like Play Doh visually in my mind, can be shaped and molded. Versus if you ever Play Doh again, too, that when it all dries out, it gets rigid and it cracks and it breaks. And we don't want to crack and break when we're confronted with new ideas. Learning to embrace this discomfort when you're examining a new thought, it's just another mental exercise. And it's saying to yourself, this is just a thought. It's not going to hurt me. You may even physically tense up and your brain might rebel as you are even considering this for a moment. And that's normal. You can breathe through it. It's just a thought. Allowing a thought into your brain is not going to brainwash you and it's not going to break you. And that's it. You just allow it in. If you want to go deeper, and this is something, a conversation with another person, for example, you can consider why it might be true to that person. Is it something that you want to consider or learn more about? Is any part of it true? You don't have to believe a new thing in the end, but being able to consciously think is crucial for your growth and emotional regulation. Another thing that isn't as commonly associated with this, but is really important for the work that I do, is that mental flexibility is critical for self love and self acceptance. Okay. And these are skills that are really hard for my overthinkers and people pleasers and perfectionists. It's really hard for them to understand that two competing thoughts can be true, especially about yourself. We don't want to feel wrong or to challenge what we have always thought because then it introduces the whole concept of being wrong and failure. And that is just way too freaking scary. So, one of the first things that we do in coaching is being able to learn to be able to have contradictory thoughts and also work on this whole notion of what is actually wrong and what is failure. And that in itself is kind of cognitive dissonance. That failure is bad and unacceptable is one thought, and trying new things is how I grow, and that I won't be successful initially. Those two are contradictory. Failure is bad and unacceptable, and I can try new things to grow. And when you can hold two things as true, you are more accepting and compassionate of yourself and of other people, less judgmental. You can look at yourself and not just see the negative, but see that more than one thing can be true at the same time. Because it's quite possible that I'm a good friend, and at times I'm a less engaged friend. Both can be true in different moments, and they conflict with each other, but they're both true. I'm a mom who yells at my kids and a mom who loves my kids. Might seem contradictory, and in moments, they are both true. It might be something like I'm a supportive partner and a non supportive partner sometimes. Again, depending on the moment. You can be someone who doesn't make a whole lot of money now and will in the future. It's not one or the other. It's about both. It's about and. We are human and many things can be true at once. Earlier, when I was talking about it being hard to change your thinking when you're confronted with new information, this is also true when you apply it to yourself. If you have the thought, I am a hot mess, your brain wants this to be true. It's going to give you evidence, it's going to give you examples, and someone telling you that you're not may actually make you dig in and believe even more that you're a hot mess because you can only see that one thing. That's mental rigidity. But mental flexibility is having the skill and being able to think, yep, sometimes I might be a hot mess. And other times it's true that I am calm AF. Both can be true in the moment. And allowing your brain to expand and hold space just for a moment that this other thing can also be true. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Allowing both to be true momentarily can help you move more in alignment with who you are, who you want to be, and how you want to show up. While there is some discomfort in that, it doesn't have to be a roller coaster. It doesn't have to be hugely painful and filled with drama and beating yourself up. You will have to stretch out of your comfort zone a little bit. But remember, this is an active and not a passive process. And you only have to do it for a moment. Just hold it and then you can let it go. Consistent, conscious thinking of holding this contradictory thoughts will help you grow and evolve a little bit each day. So I hope this gave you something to think about today. It might even be contradictory to what you have thought in the past about these two things being true, and that you need to be able to have mental flexibility in order to grow, in order to eventually have that emotional regulation. This might be different than what you have thought in the past. And just allow that thought in for a few moments. And if you like it and you want to consider it, you can bring it back in and try it again. And if you would like help with this process and learning to work on mental flexibility on a larger scale and emotional flexibility and changing the way that you show up, changing the way that you feel on a daily basis, I would love to help you with one-on-one coaching. You can always schedule a free 45-minute Zoom consult with me directly on the website, coachwithkristen.com, or message me on Facebook and Instagram. I hope you have a great week. Enjoy these longer days and the beautiful weather wherever you are. Talk to you next week. Thank you for listening to the Stop Overthinking podcast with Kristen Odegaard. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone else who would benefit from the message. To learn more about working with me and links to social media and free resources, head over to my website, coachwithkristen.com. That's Kristen spelled Kristen. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. Have a great week.